Well, welcome everyone. Welcome, Daniel, to another episode of Leadership Inside Out. Today, I'd like to introduce Daniel Gagnon, who is based in Canada, my first Canadian, and has a wonderful background over a range of really interesting things. As an ex-project manager myself, his knowledge, his background in training in an Agile, certainly something I'm really looking forward to. So welcome, Daniel.
No, thank you, Guy. I'm very, very pleased to be here.
Wonderful. So, Daniel, should we just start at the beginning? You talk to me about your career. Where did it all start for you?
So I would describe my career as a fortunate string of reinventions, and let me explain that. So, to give you the 10,000 foot overview, my career started when I was 20, when I dropped out of college to go backpacking in Europe on what I thought would be a gap year. So, just from my background, I'm Canadian, so I'm half French, half Irish, all trouble, as I like to say to people. And growing up bicultural really does something to your brain. This is proven. So, long story short, in college, I started taking German courses, and I realized, wow, it's the early 1980s. This could be, if I wanted to work and live elsewhere, in addition to English and French, German, especially in the 80s, would have,
Absolutely.
where Western Germany was a powerhouse and so on. To me, it was, wow, if I learn a language, that really opens up my options. So I got to my first year of university and decided, you know what, I can't take it anymore. I've got to go get myself over to Germany and perfect my German and so on. So I left and I went and I stayed for several months and came back with better German. But then I don't feel like going back, taking up my studies. So I wound up, my dad was working at a local television station. He was an electrician, and he was taking care of the lighting and so on. And he had an opportunity at one point to, they were asking, for young people who were sort of in shape to, they had this annual event called the Telethon. Anyway, they needed a lot of muscle power. And so I did that, and I shoved stages around for a couple of days, and I said, whoa. And I thought the money was very good at the time for someone who was basically, living very, very, very cheaply. So I decided that, hey, I would make myself available if any other work came up. And sure enough, some did. And within a year, I've been hired full time. So I was then 21, working full time as a stagehand. So everything from football games to music shows to stuff in studio. And I was 21 and making good money, and I said, oh, I'll go back to university. Anyway, it never happened, because at 22 I met someone. I met a woman, a girl here, was a tourist here from Germany, and I sort of fell in love, and we were married 6 months later.
Wow.
We were married 6 months later, at which point I was promptly laid off from my job, and my wife was obviously unable to work. So at 22, talk about being dealt unexpected curveballs. Here I am at 22, married to an immigrant wife with basically just unemployment insurance in front of me.
Wow.
So I then started into one of my multiple, shall we say, unwilling reinventions. So I wound up doing all kinds of odd jobs for about 6 months, including, drilling holes and through concrete in various buildings, construction type stuff for a few months. Then I got called back to the old job. So weaving along here, I actually wound up, I never told you what I was majoring in. I was majoring in art history because I had always painted and drawn, and I wanted to. So another long story short, as I'm working at the studios, the first systems come out where you could actually create infographics for television.
Yeah.
And I noticed this. So I went to see the guy who was operating this and said, hey, I work in the studio. I was all covered in dust and had wires around me. I work in the studios. Can you, if I show you my drawings, would you allow me to learn the system with you? And he just looked at me and went, well, show me your drawings. So I showed him his drawings. And lo and behold, I said, you know what? whenever it's not too busy and you want to come around and I'll show you the system. So what I did was when I had a shift, I stayed in the building and went to see this guy and sat beside him for probably 3-4 months. And then a job opened up and I was trained. So I just applied, and again, I was all scruffy with a t-shirt, and I was sweating, and I had I had the belt with gaffer tape and stuff like that on me. And I went to the manager, said, "Who are you? Aren't you from the studio? Shouldn't you be some taping stuff somewhere?" And no, I'd like to apply. I'm trained. What do you mean you're trained? So that started a whole new. So that taught me computers. That got me into. I actually won a Canadian Emmy 23 in this job.
Wow.
For a comedy series. So here I was, 6 months. I won the Emmy in the room where I had installed the electricity in my previous job. And I'm not where I put the plugs in and hammered and sawed and dusted. And here I am, 6 months later, winning an Emmy in this room. So that was my first taste of the series of reinventions. So by 25, my first child was born. She was born severely autistic with epilepsy, ADHD. So here we are again with a curveball being thrown to us. But I mean, this is something. It was our first child. So I have three sons and a stepdaughter. They're all in their 30s now, all doing well. But when people ask, what is it to have raised a child with autism and with such difficulties? I said, well, actually, as a parent, you're asking me that, but I can tell you, I don't know any different. No. So I can't tell you, oh, I wish I was like you. I don't know. And believe me, my so-called, normative sons gave me a lot more trouble in their teenage years than Philip ever did. So anyway, so getting back to my narrative, because we want to talk about other stuff too besides that, but getting back to my narrative, at one point I saw an opportunity. The first of my 4 forays into business for myself came when a few years later, after I've been there for 5 years, basically. So the systems I were operating, a competitor opened up shop, needed trained operators, and they were willing not only to offer a job, but as the owner called it, a piece of the action. So basically, I became like a junior partner, and my compensation then relied also on basically how well we did. So I went there and stayed there for 5 years, built the business up to 15 people, branched out into, at the time, 1995, CD-ROM, CDI, the web. And that's when I became a project manager for the first time in 95, when I had 10 people and I could no longer just be doing the work. I had to start managing. Most people become managers and project managers accidentally this way. Hey, get over here. Somebody's got to take care of overseeing this. Do you have any experience? No, good.
You look like you know what you're doing.
The accidental project manager. So I became the accidental project manager, and finally I left that business at one point because we weren't seeing eye to eye anymore, and basically went off completely on my own, right, and proceeded to go bankrupt in 8 months. with 3 kids and my wife, who still could only get occasional. I was always the sole support, or almost. So promptly went bankrupt in about 8 months. So I discovered the strategy of going back to a job, because at one point, persistence is good, but when you have a family to feed, dreams won't. You just have to at one point. In Agile and Lean, we have something called the last responsible moment. You should delay, but in life, it's easy to mistake the last responsible moment for the first irresponsible moment. So you have to make sure that you sort of hit that decision in that ballpark.
Yeah.
So went back to a job. Now at this point, this was in multimedia. Became the executive producer for a company that were doing a lot of the CD-ROM stuff. And also at that point, this was the .com era was approaching. So I was approached by a startup to continue this. So 25,000 options, looked like a gold mine. And after I got there, after 8 months, they folded and I was out. My options were worth 16 cents. So at that point, I got divorced.
Yeah. So
here I was. I wound up in a 1.5 apartment with a plastic chair and my mattress.
Wow.
and no job. So again, just sort of the old dusting off, and basically at that point I went back into business as an independent consultant in that realm, and actually I had lined up a few clients during the startup years because I had the year, not even, because we tended to meet a lot of people. So that was my first stint for about a year and a half of successfully running a consulting business. But then the dot-com hit, the dot-com, bubble burst completely, and I was finding it difficult then to find consulting work. So again, strategy, go back to a job. So I wound up in Canada's largest telecom, where I stayed for 3 years. At that point, I became tempted by someone in my circle, someone very close, to look at day trading the stock market. So yes, I quit my job. Well, actually, I quit just before I was let go, because there was a restructuring, and I knew I was going to be let go again. Anyway, so I went and did my Canadian securities course and my trader training course, and got the official letters of recognition from the Montreal and Toronto stock exchanges, and became a professional day trader for a firm for another 8 months. That was a fascinating discovery into, I didn't lose money. I was using the firm's money, and I had to pay up. The way it works is during the month you had about $4,000 to $5,000 in fees, your Reuters feed, your Belzberg, your this, your that, the seat you're in. So when you had traded and profitably enough to get $5,000, you paid that. So for me, this usually happened towards the middle of the month. So the rest of the month, you're under incredible pressure to make some kind of money for yourself. And you had to go big on volume if you wanted to have any kind of. So I was very risk averse when it came to the firm's money, and basically after 8 months, I had made about $15,000 for myself. So again, at that point, go back to a job. So I was hired by an local IT consulting firm who couldn't figure me out, because at this point my resume is looking kind of patchy. TV, and then 2 attempts at business, and we're talking 2004, so it's still not wow. This is a fascinating resume. It's like, can you explain this mess? Was the reaction I was getting, right? Can you explain this mess? And I tried as best as I could. So finally, a firm took me on, because the owner said, "I'm hiring you. I don't know why. I think you're going to be good for us. I have no specific reason. I'm going to try you on." And that was a really great experience. It was a wonderful firm. That's where they encouraged me to take my PMP certification, to become a professional project manager, certified, et cetera, et cetera. And I stayed with them for many years until I finally was offered a job at a large financial institution to become a project and portfolio manager. So we're talking 2010. And that was my first introduction to Agile. I was the Agile project manager on a team. Funny story though, that very team, this is how ignorant I was of what Agile was at the time, and it was 2010, there was no excuse. There was this team beside me that used to get up in the morning and hold this thing they would call the stand-up, and they'd laugh, and they had Nerf toys, and I was right beside them trying to run my project, and I had to put my earphone. I went to complain about these people. I said, I don't know what this team think they're doing, but they're very loud and obstructive, and could you move my seat? And they said, "Oh." So we were just about to tell you, we was just about to come to you, said, "You're actually inheriting, you're moving to that team next week." I said, "What?" "Yeah, the project managers left, and they're doing Agile, but we also have project managers with our Agile stuff." I thought, "Are you kidding me?" So my first instance was, I'm going to teach these clowns how to work. Oh, such hubris. And I was in my 40s. I had no excuse. I was very, late onset hubris. I don't know. But so they taught me how to work. I mean, and to this day, I have not found a more efficient and just wonderful to behold and successful Agile team. It's because for a bunch of reasons, it was the right mix of people, it was the right mix of governance. And when I arrived, I quickly gave up my ideas of trying to make them work, and they taught me how to work, and they taught me to let go of the rails, the control that I thought project management was about, and they taught me to basically allow for agency and allow for purpose to be. Anyway, it was just an incredible experience, and I'm still in touch, still friends with those folks to this day. We're talking, probably going on 15 years now.
Wow.
So what happened was the scrum master of that team Scrum Master being, for folks who don't know, that's just a role within the Scrum methodology in Agile. The Scrum Master who takes care of the team's coordinations. He and I basically, finally between us, the fact that I was exposing their Agile way of working in a non-intrusive, non-confrontational way to the board, as opposed to some Agilists, especially in those days, had a sort of not too friendly towards management attitude, sort of a revolutionary. That rough edge could, would be good to sand off. And so as a project manager of this team, I was selling the benefits of what was being achieved with Agile without the confrontational edge. And it got, so what that happened is this is a 100,000 person employee financial institution. So it got their attention of the corporate layer. So long story short, the Scrum Master and I were promoted to an enterprise version of an Agile Center of Excellence, and we started it off. So it did that for several years until I guess 2017, I decided I was going to go off on my own as an enterprise Agile consultant. And my first gig was with another large financial institution to actually be head of their Agile practice. And that was just a wonderful experience for 18 months. At that point, I realized when you're an external consultant at that level, if you stay on longer than that, you get drawn into the internecine wars, and you no longer are in a position to offer the objectivity. So basically, I found myself taking sides, and I left. I just couldn't, especially with the sort of the Agile and Lean principles and philosophy that I thought I should be representing. Allowing myself to be drawn in and take sides in internal turf wars was not. So again, I left with no other gig in mind. So yet another period of challenge, several weeks, several months of deciding, well, what's my next client going to be. Fortunately, that period ended, and I wound up in a long period of multiple clients doing fractional work before the word fractional was in vogue. So other financial institutions, manufacturing, telecom, utilities, video games. So for the last 8 years, well, taking with 18 months, last 6 years have been multiple clients until last year. And in addition to that, I started, expanding my offering, doing a lot of training, leadership development training, because I realized in agility too, the teams aren't the teams are more than willing to try this stuff most of the time if it's even properly presented. It's leadership. And the reason leadership is often resistant to it is because, again, there's a confrontational edge to a lot of the folks in the Agile community over the years that have been sort of like, well, if you're a manager, the best thing you could do is step aside. Well, you still need leadership, right? And self-organization only works to a certain extent. And I've developed this model that has leadership behavior and ego and mindset, which drives governance, which then drives the practices that are even permissible or will work in an organization. So the Agile model was always to intervene directly at the practices and saying it would flow up. But in my experience, and what we've seen also with the backlash against big, Agile scaling and so on, is that things that are introduced at the practice level do not bubble up as well as the theory said. Yeah. So many years ago, I started, and again, I've done like 28 certifications over the years. So anytime there was anything that I could learn, I went deep. I just didn't, to me, reading a blog wasn't enough. I had to, if there was a certification on it, I would go for it. It's also sort of a PTSD reaction to all the, the peaks and valleys of my career. Is I always expect the next crash to be coming, and I'm striving to, still at 61, striving to, I obtained my 30th certification, Green Project Manager, in January. I'm always expecting the roof to fly off at any time, so I'm always as ready as I can. And it also goes back to a book I read in 2014, Anti-Fragile, by Nassim Taleb, and I'm segueing here. I'll get back to where I was. Okay. He basically said, look at a dandelion when it's puffy and white, and it's all little parachutes, right? That is what you want to be. What? So a dandelion in that state is the most anti-fragile thing imaginable, because you can kick it, the dog can run through it, you can mow it, you can shake it upside down, whatever you do to it, it's rejoicing because it's spreading the species. You think you're destroying it, but you're making 100 of these.
Absolutely.
And our immune system is sort of like that. And, so the fascinating things in nature are anti-fragile. He invented the word because there's no real opposite to fragile. Like he said, robust just means eventually you're going to break down. You're just going to take more punishment than the average. Resilient just means you snap back to where you were, but there's no improvement there. And I had a little rant here, for about 18 months, the word resilient has been unavoidable on social media and so on. But hey, go beyond that, be anti-fragile, because resilient just goes back to same old, same old. I've been broken in so many places. Hemingway, right? The world breaks us all. Some become broken some become strong in the broken places. I feel like I've been broken in so many places that I am nothing but scars and nubs. So I'm almost indestructible now. But still, I expect the roof to fall off. So I'm to fly away. So I'm still preparing. So leadership.
Sorry.
Leadership development. I went for I've certified as an ICF coach. That was, through, a lot of people say, well, coaching, you don't need to be certified and so on. No, it's not, there's no standard in the world. ICF is trying to, but, when I went through this, it took me 3 years to get through it while working, because you need like a bunch of training, you need to do a bunch of reading, then you need to coach for 100 hours, then you need to be coach mentored for 100 hours, then you have to submit recordings of coaching, then you get the permission to take the exam, right? So compared to that 3-year journey, someone just putting up a shingle saying I'm a coach because I've read a few books, you might have a natural predisposition towards it, and you might be able to ask the right questions and so on, but you would not, as Gershwin said, if study kills a musical endowment, that the endowment deserved to die. Well, if study kills a coaching endowment, maybe you shouldn't have been a coach. So I'm not saying you don't have to be certified to be a coach, but boy, when I look back at my journey, and I still feel like an imposter when I'm coaching sometimes, I wonder what people who didn't certify feel like. So not an advertisement for anyone, just a reflection of my journey. So speaking of the roof flying off. So last year, I've had glaucoma for several years, and I developed cataracts about 18 months ago. But it got so bad so that last year, at the beginning of the year, I basically was in a position where, even with having changed glasses 3 times, I couldn't see anything anymore. So I needed the cataracts removed. But because of my glaucoma, which was also advancing, I've lost a lot of peripheral vision. I can't see myself doing this on the left side. It's neither here nor there. So I spent the year, I underwent 6 operations over the year. So, and each one had, I went back to the clinic, back to the hospital about 22 times over for these 6 operations. So I went through the year, I'm half blind or worse in either one eye or the other. So I couldn't really work. So this is where I reinvented myself again. And this brings us to what I'm doing in business-wise now, which is, I call it dynamic value curation. But we'll hive that off to just a quick mention later on. But again, this last year, I actually, my coaching exam, I don't know if this is going to be video, but I basically I was at a Pearson Center, and I was looking like this because I had to be 1 inch from the screen to read the questions, and had to Uber myself there and back. Wow. Because I couldn't make my way on public transportation. But I had booked it, and I went, and I said, I found my oldest pair of glasses that worked a bit, and I passed. But I'm sure I've missed a couple of questions because I couldn't quite make out if that's an R or a T, an L or an I.
Wow. Daniel, what an amazing story. And I started this blog, for people just like you. On the surface, you're white, male, well educated. I know not university, but certainly in the school of life. And yet you talk about those things you've overcome, and just you're still smiling.
Yes, because and that's maybe just we are who we are through, I don't know, but I haven't always, there is times where it's difficult to smile, But now I'm at the point where, bring it on.
Wow.
Bring it on. The last year, during the good years of the consulting business, I'd amassed a war chest. So to bring. So what I've done for the last year is the one thing I realized through everything, through the project management, through the agile stuff, through the leadership development, through working with all kinds of organizations, Guy, I saw the same problem everywhere. There is too much going on at once. Always too many projects, too many initiatives, too much going on at once. And the way organizations decide what work to do was suboptimal most of the time. You have situations where it's because the owner wants it, situations because the board has pressured the CEO, situations where a very ambitious VP has political influence and has convinced the CEO to throw the money their way. There are so many anti-patterns to the way money and resources should be allocated. And this angers and frustrates people in the organization because the people doing the work can see when the work they're doing is not the best thing they should probably be doing. There's something other. So portfolio management. Project and initiative portfolio manager is what I set my sights upon because I had seen it time and time again, and especially in the agile space. Here you are trying to improve the practices, but there's no point in speeding up the wrong thing being done. There really isn't, and there's no point in speeding up something that should not have been started in the first place. That goes back to Drucker. I mean, there's never anything new under the sun. Right?
No, stick to the knitting.
Stick to the knitting. So I have assembled now an approach. It's a consulting approach, it's a training approach, it's a coaching approach, and I've actually developed a small software utility. So that's the other thing. During that year, I started playing around with AI, and I actually was able to build a prototype of software that did what I wanted to do, which is the following. So inspired by, standing on the shoulders of giants, inspired by the work of like Don Reinertsen, who talked about economic, cost of delay, in his book. For those who haven't read this book, the principles of product development flow, second edition. It's a mind-bending read. You have to read it 3 times to get it. But he's basically saying the cost of, look at the cost of delay. If something is not sensitive to being delivered at a certain time, then you can do something else beforehand. But if it is, think of an amusement park, right? If you have 2 things to repair, the roller coaster or something else, you need that roller coaster up day 1 if you want to make the most money. Right? You're not going to attract people to a Six Flags with no roller coaster. So there are things that are very time sensitive. This is just one of the things. So Reinertsen, the idea of intangible value being monetized in business cases is extremely important. So back in one of the organizations where I was working, we had applied the SAFE framework, and what SAFE did that was most important to me was they actually made the work of Don Reinertsen visible. And they called it weighted shortest job first, like Reinvention had called it. But I tried that, and I tried that as a portfolio prioritization scheme in a large bank, and too many problems with it. And the biggest problem with it is they're using the Fibonacci sequence to sort of decide on all kinds of variables, and that goes way off the rails because it's meant to be used by agile teams estimating. But when you apply it with leaders trying to apply that to multi-million-dollar, the politics get too intense.
Always the politics.
9 times out of 10, and basically, so coming back to that, what I realized was all these business cases, like I saw it, like even in the recent clients, we think this is going to increase employee retention, but we're not going to put a number in that. We think this is going to reduce client friction, but we're not going to put a number of that. So it's just sort of vague, and that becomes, well, it's going to decrease client friction, therefore I want it. So I also came across, and when I was doing this thing with AI to basically be able to run Monte Carlo simulations on multiple variables of a business case, that's what it was about. Came across the work of Douglas Hubbard, How to Measure Anything. So I took a couple of courses from from his institute how to make Monte Carlo simulations by hand in Excel. I wanted to do that before using AI to do it. That way I had these hand-hewn simulations with all the variables that I knew worked, and then I would try to recreate that. And so I used them as a control against AI. And let me tell you, 6 to 8 months, 200 hallucinatory tests later, I decided to give the whole thing over to a developer. So here's my take on AI. When it is, and this is from a project manager who had never coded to use AI to prototype something. So take it with a grain of salt. But here's my metaphor. So if you're coding with AI, with a LLM, with a large language model like Gemini or ChatGPT, right? I'm not talking about things that exist like GitHub Copilot in that's sitting beside the code necessarily. If you're going to try coding with an LLM, look at it this way. You're standing on a raised platform in an immense, endless gymnasium that is actually endless. And it is populated by endless cubicles with endless developers in it. So you take a megaphone and say, I want this. Immediately, it's done. Like literally, immediately. It's pretty much done.
Yeah.
And you look at this, and it's sort of doing what you want. And the other time is half the time, as soon as it gets more complicated. So the reason I had to start learning to code a bit is when you ask something, it'll do it in its Python environment, let's say. But then if you get more complicated, it'll say, the environment is too busy, we can't I'm giving you the Python code. The first time it did that to me, I'm going, dude, I don't know. Don't give me code. I'm a project manager. But then I said, so I went back and the third time it gave me back code, I said, okay, Dan, Rubicon, you're going to install Python and you're going to start figuring this out, at least enough to be able to run what this thing is giving you, because it's not doing it in its environment anymore. So back to the original problem, though, is that once I had Python installed and I could look at it and like a doofus just sort of make out, okay, I guess this means that, and I guess this means that. I'm a project manager, I have no clue, but this looks like it does that. So I would resubmit it, and then I realized, whoa, so that every time you take the megaphone, can you fix this part of it? Yeah, immediately. Giving you the code, of course, now at this point. But then I looked at it and I realized it's a completely different developer from another universe in terms of its outlook. It's used different libraries. Yeah. It's completely taken from scratch all the time. So then I did a couple of certifications in AI just to, just mini courses so I got a little bit better at looking at the output and so on, a little bit better in interacting with it. And then I realized no matter how much you give it back and say, change only this. No. So, well, no, it's to the other end of the gymnasium, 4 kilometers this way, right? As opposed to 3 kilometers this way. So what I was looking for was a utility that would allow to run simulations on tangible and intangible benefits, all monetized to diminish the role of revenue in terms of the entirety. But that needs to be able to stand up to internal governance scrutiny.
Absolutely.
And there is no way that giving this over to AI prompts, for one thing, there is such thing as, what kind of a random seed are you using? And I don't want to get into details, but if you're not using the same, like being consistent upon that, your results are going to vary wildly. And as I learned more about Monte Carlo, with distribution or using, you have to be able to prove to governance, if I create a tool like this, governance needs to know the internal workings. Yeah. They need to know that I'm being consistent across projects, across portfolios, and so on. So now it's been months I've given it over to developers. So I've spent the rest of the war chest on development, on trademarking. I have two trademarks now for the actual approach, and the software is called Value Curator. The word curation is chosen specifically because it is the act of exposing, but also the act of removing at a museum, right? Acknowledging the fact that you can't do everything, that you can't show everything. That's what I want it to be about, value curation, not value management, not, you can't trademark anything in those with near those words. And the trademarks I thought were just a necessary step, because if you are going to develop something, now after all this crazy journey, I'm now becoming a software publisher, I guess. I guess that's the word. So I'm in 2 beta sites now, and my goal with the years ahead of me are to build this up so basically it's a viable concern that someone can take up. There's a product, there's an approach. So, what I'm looking at now, where I'm at in the market, is I'm proposing a 4 to 5 week proof of concept, whereby we'll come in, we're going to look at all the tangibles, we're going to dust off the business cases, speak to stakeholders, and we're going to look at either 5 initiatives in your pipeline, or we're going to look at the 5 top things you've going now and say, is this really the priority that you should be doing them in? Because with Value Curator, you run about 1 million simulations in 9 seconds or 19 seconds, depending on the machine.
Wow.
So there's no reason that anytime anything changes, we thought there would be $3 million in benefits, but a competitor just introduced something that blows us out of the water, and we have to redefine the benefits. This is always a scenario I was presenting, and it felt like people were going, yeah, until DeepSeek, right? DeepSeek completely justified this thing I was saying. I was saying it on experience, having seen it. I remember back in banking, Check 21. Check 21 was the ability to image a check, right? If you're the first bank to do it, it was like, wow, that was like but if you're the 6th fast follower, no one cares anymore that you're offering the ability to basically take a picture of your. It's no longer a differentiator. So, features over time, you need to be faster. You can't be the last one to introduce it. So yeah, so you can basically, what this gives you is a running dashboard with one number, basically the cost of delay divided by the duration, and you get a running number of all your major projects, and you can see the ones that are going down, whose value is eroding, because it's now a leading indicator. It's not, wow, it's been in the market 6 months and it's tanking. No, it's a leading indicator, and you can curate that away, and you can escape the sunk cost fallacy. So that's where I'm at. That's
wow.
2 beta sites now. I'm looking for more. Just published a white paper on this, which I'm going to be releasing through LinkedIn and other channels next week. So, now just looking, hoping to, what I really hope is that I have an impact with it. I don't need to be selling this to every Tom, Dick, and Harry. I don't need to be. This is not a mass market thing. But if I can bring this into 3 or 4 organizations like this year, and actually see the organization make a choice to deprioritize or cull something, and not replace it with more work, so that people have more time to actually be productive. The whole thing that got me into the Agile space was wanting to make people happier at work, wanting to change society. If people are happier at work, maybe they would have better personal lives. I don't know. It was very naive and but I still stick to that. That's why I got into coaching. I want to make a difference at the people level. And to me, this is the ultimate. If we can get portfolio, if we get management to do less at once and to sequence things so that people get a break from the relentless wheel, and they're actually getting a better bottom line for it, and people are staying and customers are happier, that's what the impact I would like to have in 3 or 4 organizations. Even if it takes me 2 years to hit 3 or 4 organizations this way, I can slowly go into retirement. Never completely, because I'll be able to coach in retirement. The whiter my hair gets, the more credible I'll get.
Absolutely.
But
yeah,
whoa, okay, that was a rant.
I'm the same with the beard. Well, Daniel, that I'm blown away. That is an inspirational story, and as I say, the fact that you're still smiling. You've talked about being unemployed, being made redundant, about your first child. Again, all of those sort of issues, personal health issues, and yet you're continuing to develop. If you look back, what are some of those sort of key periods? What are some of those key messages? What are the skills you think you've learned and you drew upon to help you through those hard times?
I've been reflecting on that, and it's one word. It's going to sound funny. One word is doubt.
Okay.
I've learned that doubt can be a hindrance, and it can also be a friend. So it is going to be a friend when it becomes a warning signal to you that something is not right. when you start doubting your commitment to something, and that could even be a marriage, but to a job, to a career path, when you start doubting that, and these doubts reoccur, listen. It is your I guess your unconscious, your subconscious, trying to tell you something. It's saying you could be in a better situation than you are now if you are willing to act.
Right.
And the doubts won't go away until you act, or until, I guess, and here's the thing, I always acted on those doubts no matter how painful it was, because I wanted. The funny thing is, when you reinvent yourself and you go through these periods of misery, you realize that they don't kill you.
No, very true.
And sometimes you just have to, okay, I have to reinvent myself again, because there's no way the doubts are too strong. They're keeping me up at night. So there's that. There's the dangerous doubts, the doubts that are more linked to things like imposter syndrome and so on, which we all get. So when you catch yourself doubting, try to make sure that you find out which kind of doubt is it. If it's the good kind of doubt that's pushing you to move on, then look at what practical steps, be it education, be it networking, be it just being curious and reaching out and asking yourself questions, or going for coaching maybe, or even in some cases therapy. But act on the productive doubt. And again, for the sort of the doubt that becomes a hindrance, that will show up usually after you've made the jump. So there's doubt before the jump, the reinvention, and there's doubt after the reinvention. So the doubt after the reinvention is healthy, but you can't let it take you over. And again, that's where coaching can help, and where just, the doubts those types of doubts are very vulnerable to success. So if anything goes well in your new endeavor, they will tend to put aside, right? And also, rely on your family, your partner, family, siblings, friends, your network. One thing, I never bottled this stuff up. I always shared and opened up to folks. I was never one to want to feel like, want to appear 12 feet tall and bulletproof. If something was wrong, I found people to share it with, and that saved me, because had I kept all this for myself, we're at Reinvention 6 right now, and I wouldn't have made it past Reinvention 3 had I kept it to myself.
Wonderful advice. Thank you. Wow. So, any last thoughts? We've talked about your career. We've talked about your personal growth. You've still clearly going strong. Clearly got ambitions, big ambitions for the future, which is inspirational. But any last thoughts before we finish up? Make sure you have a hobby or interests other than work that you can, this is trite sort of cliche advice, but what saved my sanity was literature. Right. Just reading fiction. To get away from, you can't just be consuming business literature. You can't just be consuming blogs and podcasts, and you can't just be reading articles. And yes, there's that. But when it comes to intellectual pursuits beyond work, I'm not talking about sports and stuff. I cycle and stuff like that. But that cycling didn't save my mind. It helps the body and stuff like that. But what saved my mind was to, go into the world of a novel and emerge 5 hours later, and whatever you were thinking of before that, it's being somewhere else. Like I read everything from science fiction to classics to current modern literature, and no matter what type of book you're reading, just escape is very, very intellectually cleansing. Wonderful. And any thoughts, any final words for your younger self? Actually, I would just, if I were to pop up beside my younger self, yes, there were times I would have been tempted, but that broken road was necessary, and every
mistake, every failure, every dead end, every regret was necessary for me to be sitting smiling here today. So I would just probably show up and just pat him on the shoulder and say, "Yeah, keep it up."
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, Daniel, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to listen to your story today. Thank you, and I wish you all the very best for your new adventures.
And thank you for the opportunity, Guy. And I know, you know, when you contacted me, it was such a your podcast was new, but your approach was unique, and you went about it in a very professional way. And I know as we were chatting earlier, you've had more guests than you even had hoped for. And I wish you all the best. And I'll be tuning in to hear what the fascinating people that I'm sure you've been talking to, and I'll be a regular listener to the show.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks, Daniel.
Thanks, Guy.